Hey, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is, if you just clicked on a video titled, "How often should I argue in a healthy relationship?" you're probably arguing too much. The good news, you don't have to perpetuate that pattern. So hear me out. The reality is there's enough science to show that there are certain ways to engage that can build a person with you and allow you to actually give them critical feedback so that they can hear it. And through the study of behavioral science, they have discovered that we have emotional credits with certain people. We can have a credit if we have a 5-to-1 positive to negative ratio. For every critical piece of feedback you give someone, you must have 5 positives to build a credit, an emotional credit with that person. So if you don't have that ratio intact and you begin to say, give somebody 3 pieces of advice on how to improve and you give them 5 positive things, it is not enough. They will walk away feeling overwhelmed and defeated. And you don't build them up, right? And so we often in our relationships fail to meet that ratio. We might be highly critical of our spouse, our significant other, the people around us, without even realizing that that's what we're doing. We may feel in ourselves that that person is great and wonderful, and we're just helping them to get a little bit better by pointing out a few things here and there. And this goes for your children, this goes for the people that you work with, this goes for your most intimate relationships. Pay attention to this because it's powerful. So I want to give you a story of how this was used in my life, right? John Gottman, who is considered one of the great marriage therapists out there, has built his whole career around a lot of research of empirical ways that you can approach a relationship and have success. And he identified 4 things that really cause you to be unsettled, to argue, and to not be able to draw together beyond the 5-to-1 ratio. And he calls them the 4 horsemen. You know, there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He calls it the 4 horsemen of divorce. And he was so good at this, he would interview couples, and within 2 minutes, he had over a 97% predictive ability just based on looking at these 4 things. So if you are being critical, if you have contempt, if you're feeling defensive, or if you're stonewalling, those are the 4 horsemen of the end of your relationship. If those things are evident, any one of those in your marriage, you want to ferret them out. If you are feeling critical, contemptuous, defensive, and stonewalling, man alive, your marriage needs work. And that might be why you're here watching this video. It doesn't mean you can't save this, right? What it means is these are the things you got to look at. These are the incremental steps that you take. And I remember in my relationship that failed. When I first learned this positive ratio thing, I began to work actively to try to always offer 5 positives to 1 critical. And it had a huge impact in what I was able to draw out of the relationships with my children, with my spouse, and in my workplace. It was amazing to me how arguments began to just fall away, and people were willing, when I asked them to do something, to just jump in because I had an emotional credit with them. The one thing that I did not look at, I was scared to, even though I was in marriage therapy, was the 4 horsemen. Criticism that was in my marriage, the contempt that I felt, the defensiveness that I represented. I was very defensive, and the stonewalling and keeping, behaviors away and trying to not deal with it. These were things that I struggled with myself. And I didn't really delve into that. So if you've got this thing, so if you're arguing a lot and you now understand, I've got to get a 5-to-1 ratio, positives to critical. And I got to take a look at within myself and within my spouse, if I'm seeing eye rolling, if I'm seeing contempt, if I'm seeing defensiveness when I ask a question, or if I see stonewalling, or do I have those within myself that I'm doing in connection with my spouse? This creates a conversation. Truthfully, the number of times you argue doesn't matter. If that ratio is intact and you guys just like to argue, you're passionate people, no problem. Because you still hold that respect and you have that emotional credit with each other. So let me give you an example of how I use this. Honestly, I wasn't as successful at it in my own relationship, but it is still true in a work environment. And I was working with a man who was a leader, and he had a team of people around him that really were not connected to him. And he was asking them to do a lot of work, and his team was not happy to help out. And so I told him about this 5-to-1 ratio. It was so hard for him to understand it for a number of reasons. First of all, he did not give compliments. He didn't believe, well, I don't know that he didn't believe in them. He was uncomfortable with it. It made him feel uncomfortable. So he didn't even know how to deliver. So I literally had to craft with him written compliments that he could give to his people. And I had to have him start to write hash marks on how many positive things. And so if he was going to give feedback to one of his employees and he would bring him in to have a conversation, I would say, okay, so you may have a list of 20 things that you want to change in this person, but you cannot. And I didn't explain this to him, but this is what happened to me one time when I was watching him run a meeting. When the very first time I watched, and I had to evaluate his capacity. And I had a list of negative behaviors that I felt needed to change in this process of how he ran a meeting. And I found, really digging, 5 positive things. He started the meeting on time. He ended the meeting on time. His pace and conversation was good. He was clear and he had an agenda that we could follow. And I don't remember the last one, but I had 5 things. And so I looked at what is the most important thing that I think needs to change. Of all of the list of, say, 20 items that I wanted to change over time, I had to let it go and find one, just one. It was hard to do, but I did it. And the reason it was hard to do in this situation was I had the pressure of my company on me to get this man to a level of performance in a very short time. I didn't want to give him one. I wanted to give him all 20 and get him changing right away because my job was going to be secure based on his improvement. Overloading him would not have done it. And so I gave him one. And we worked on it. And honestly, the one thing was to deliver compliments to his people. That was what I told him to do. And so we worked on that. And it took like 3 weeks to get that one down. And this is where it gets interesting. With that one change, everything within the meeting began to open up and change. And then I saw more positives. I saw more that I could give him in response to what he had done. And then I could go on to the next thing. And slowly but surely, this incremental change began to exponentially advance. And within what I believed was a shockingly short time, which felt when it started slowly, this man became a really great leader and his team loved him and they became really close and effective because he followed that ratio. He did not show contempt to his people. He did not show defensiveness. He did not, all these things began to play out. And that is something that you can do in your own relationship. If you feel you're arguing, if you feel imbalanced, if you feel unheard, look first to building the person in front of you. Change that dynamic. And man, you got something to work with. So once and for all, let's get back to this. How often should you be arguing in a relationship? There is no number. It is how you feel about that person that you are encountering. Are they respecting you? Do they see the value in you? And do you feel that returned? And are you able to give it? And sticking to that 5-to-1 ratio and being aware of those 4 horsemen that John Gottman identifies and ferreting those out, that's all you need. You don't need to count the number of arguments. You can sit solid knowing that you're following these things and you can argue all you want and still love each other. That's what I would say. So if this resonates with you, I'd love to hear it. Let me know how you're dealing with your arguments. Or do you have a number and you need to tell me what it is? I don't know. Stick around, like and subscribe. I got another video coming up, how to overcome the fear of dating after divorce. It's a real thing. So if you're interested, stick around and watch it. If you're scared of dating, click this next video.